Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Making Strides podcast. We're just excited to be back after a hiatus of us just getting distracted with life and everything else. We're going to try and make an effort to be more consistent about getting these out, but we also need your help in, just thinking of topics and things that are going to be valuable to you to talk about. So feel free to just reach out in any way you can. I know on my website, if you go to upandrunningpt.com, there's even a Making Strides podcast part of my website where you can even record a voice clip and ask a personalized question that we will insert and answer on the next podcast episode. So feel free to take advantage of that. Housekeeping aside, unless Adam, you have anything else?
No, I'm just going to mention that I have that on my website as well at runmental.com. So whatever's
Perfect.
best for you.
And the links to our websites for convenience is in the show notes as well. So anyway, housekeeping aside, Adam, how's it going?
It's going all right. I've been better.
Why is that?
Recently, actually, it's the day after Thanksgiving. I was just playing basketball, and we'll talk more about this because it kind of spurred this episode anyway. But fractured my ankle, so I am almost 3 weeks into that. So it's been rough.
Yeah, oh man, that's super rough. I mean, how did it happen? You want to just tell everybody real quick?
Yeah, I wasn't even playing like a scrimmage game. There's nothing, super intense about it. I was just at the court outside, just shooting around. And then was just doing this like, I don't know. So I was in like a split stance and then dribbled the ball between my legs and then kind of jumped and then switched legs, went the other way. Did that a few times and then took a step with my right foot to go towards the basket. And had this pop and was immediately on the ground. Wasn't a big lateral movement, didn't go up for a rebound, and landed kind of funky on my foot and ankle. Initially thought no big deal, just like sprained it, sucks, but we'll be okay. Just walk it off. Walked around for a couple minutes, didn't get any better. Moved it around, just making sure everything's good. Poking around, resisting different directions, everything seemed okay, but the pain didn't really go away and I was having trouble walking. I was like, I'm done. Fortunately, it was only roughly a quarter of a mile from my house, so was able to get home. And then that night really swelled up and then just continue to have problems weight bearing, being able to walk on it. Pretty severe swelling to where my ankle was almost non-existent over the next 2 days. And I was like, I gotta go see urgent care. Unfortunately, here in the Springs, we have an orthopedic urgent care that specializes in stuff like this. So was able to get in there, got an X-ray, showed a fracture. Fortunately, minimally displaced, ended up not needing any surgery or anything like that. So that's kind of that story. Now I'm in a boot.
Fun stuff. Not really, but I mean, so it wasn't a bone stress injury, technically speaking, like we refer to. It wasn't I wouldn't even say a traumatic injury, really, even. I guess you would call it traumatic because it all happened that force all at once, but still, just from what we typically like, the rock climbers that come in with the ankle fractures because they fell off the boulder, like it's not a trauma like that. So, I mean, what's going through your head with like what's as a PT, knowing what what is going through your head or what did go through your head when you were like, when you found out it was a fracture and you're like, how is that even possible?
Yeah, I think this is a situation where knowing what I know almost works against me a little bit because it sent me down a rabbit hole of like all of these things that could be going on versus like when I broke my hand playing football when I was a freshman in high school, like broke it, had surgery, and then it's like, 6-8 weeks later, it's like, whatever. It's like it didn't even happen. You didn't even give like two thoughts about it. Of course, you're super young then and you're going to bounce back just fine, more than likely. But now I'm thinking about the mechanism that it wasn't that aggressive. At least, it happened fast. So maybe it's more aggressive than what I remember or really intended for it to be. I'm thinking like, is there some sort of like bone mineral density issue that I'm just missing here? That so I think about on my training, like, was there a big ramp up that because I was trying to, push things a little bit more. In the months leading up to that, added a day of running. So I was up to 4 and going through my wife's marathon training for CIM. So I had my longest run ever during that. And this was also, which my wife brought to my attention, didn't register at first, but this is also the same side I had a calf strain, a few months prior, like kind of early fall time frame. So maybe something with that. But I'm thinking like my nutrition's been good. I've been monitoring that as I've, been running a little bit more. The amount of activity that I really lost and probably was deconditioned from during the calf strain, like I feel like I had 100% recovery from that. Felt really good. And I wouldn't have lost, that much from a bone mineral density standpoint. So I was kind of left scratched my head really. So I had made an appointment with my PCP. We did a little bit of blood work. Everything checks out good. So where I sit today with my understanding is that it just happened to be the right amount of force at the right angle. And it just kind of a little bit of a freak accident.
Yeah. Remind me again what like prepubescent athletic kind of endeavors you had. Like what sports were you involved with early in life? Remind me about
Yeah,
that.
that was a good point too. Played soccer, played basketball. Those
Yeah.
are my 2 big things. Was just very active outside of that too. Running
Yeah.
around, whatever. So it's, from that standpoint, like I feel like I have a good baseline.
Yeah. I
Didn't get
mean,
into distance running until I was 15.
yeah, and unless you had some sort of like issues with or your relationship with food or something across the years, you should pretty much, from what we know, have a fairly robust skeleton from those types of axially loaded multi-directional sports during your development years, right? So yeah, a lot of this is just kind of leaving a scratch in our heads, right? So but
Yeah.
sometimes just stuff happens.
Yeah. Maybe just another thing to note is that, in the last, I think it'll be 9 years in February, I've been vegan, which, can be a considerable issue if you're not concerned with making sure you're eating enough, getting enough calcium, vitamin D, you know, checking all those boxes. Then, I mean, you can be at a greater risk being vegetarian, vegan. But as long as you're hitting those metrics, then it's really no more
Yeah,
concern than anybody else.
and I think if somebody is like an average person and like eating like a maybe 2,000 calorie diet or something like that, you could maybe choose the wrong things and not have a complete, vegan diet with all the nutrients. But like in your case, you eat like a hippo. Like you, it's a compliment, Adam. But like Adam goes to Chipotle. Last time we met up, whatever, a long time ago. But that wasn't last time, but when we met up at that course and we went to Chipotle and you had like, I think like 2 entire burritos in a single sitting, plus
Yeah.
the extra after. Anyway, so like, and I just know you anyway. So like in your case, I know that like you're getting it's very, very likely that you're getting all of the nutrients that you need because you just eat like so much volume, right? So
Yeah,
it'd be harder to
definitely.
be deficient in anything.
Yeah. But if there is any doubt in your mind, like just go get some blood work and
Yeah.
then, it's easy.
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
not too expensive for that either. It's, you know, I think I did it, and I'm part of a direct primary care, so we pay like out of pocket for all this stuff. Um, but to get the blood work, it was less than $20. And we looked at a bunch of different things
Mm-hmm.
with that. So
Yep. And yeah, just something that, I mean, if you had like another fracture sometime in the near future that was weirdly pathologic potentially as well, I would then at that point be like, oh, maybe you should go get a DEXA scan or something like that, right? Where they can actually tell you objectively where your, bone mineral density is at. But it seems like this was like hopefully a one-off freak issue. And kind of the topic we wanted to talk about today was, we have a couple of questions that come up. We'll see how many we get to within a reasonable time frame, but we wanted to answer some common questions we've been hearing and getting. And one of those is actually around rehab surrounding fractures. And, with this being a running focus podcast and we're running specialized clinicians, we help a lot of people through bone stress injuries and stress fractures. So that being the first question of like, what does rehab look like for somebody who is immobilized with a fracture? And how important is it to be doing an active and, actively participating in a rehab approach while you're quote unquote benched or sidelined, right? So
Yeah.
Adam, go for it. I don't know where you want to start on that.
Yeah, I think kind of my thoughts is just of where we take this is kind of just exploring a little bit about what I've been doing and kind of why. Because it's and even teasing out maybe stress fracture and an avulsion fracture like I have now, because there's some differences there where so long as you don't have a high grade stress fracture or a high risk stress fracture, as well as a
or
high
high
grade
grade, yeah,
where maybe you need to be immobilized for a while and have a really strict offloading kind of protocol, you can generally be more aggressive with a stress fracture doing some sort of loading versus below the knee. Like I am, other than wiggling my toes a little bit just for some circulation and such, like I've really not been doing much of anything. And so there's a lot of deconditioning that happens pretty quickly. As long as it takes you to build up strength, endurance, all the things we're chasing by putting in consistent training month after month, year after year, is gone equally as fast. So you want to be working everything that you can around that injury during that time, because we're looking at probably a 6 to 8 week window, and that's a pretty considerable time frame. This isn't, you take a week or two off and you get back into it, and there's really not much loss from that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people subscribe to the mindset of, well, I'm in a boot or whatever, and so I guess I'm just gonna do nothing the next 6 weeks until I get quote clearance from the doctor, right? And so but then you also have people who are like, oh, I'm not going to do anything except for preserve my fitness with like cycling like a maniac, right? Or something like that. And so I think I have some thoughts around both of those things. It's the thing that plays a big role is like, where is the fracture? Yeah, and like what kind is it? But I guess so for like the stress fractures and stuff, a lot of these folks can do a fair amount. We just want them avoiding all discomfort, right? We don't want any sort of pain, and then it's going to depend on what risk level the fracture is and stuff. But a lot of these folks can do a lot within a pain-free kind of range or whatever you want to call it, so a threshold. So but even if, let's just say, somebody's like completely immobilized at the ankle or foot or something like that, these folks can typically still get a ton of open chain exercises done, so where that foot's not on the ground. If you have access to a gym, like the machines become your best friend in terms of like hamstring curls and knee extensions and even like the hip machine. But just doing as much as you can to keep that side strong, those muscles strong, because when you're immobilized and you stop training, everything is going to get weaker, right? And so it's not just the area that's immobilized that will get the weakest, but your baseline being a trained state or like a consistent runner's state or whatever, a lot of that is going to not be used. It's not like you can go modify your running and figure out a way to run. You're not going to be running, okay? And so that is a fact. But the fact is also that you can't just ignore all of these other muscles that are and joints that are perfectly fine to get strengthened and be working all along. So typically, you know, I want to find if somebody comes in the clinic, I'm like, hey, let's figure out all of the exercises we can still have you doing, and let's have you do as much of that as possible. And typically it is like open chain for the affected side, and then closed chain as much as we can for the unaffected side. So that, I mean, that's pretty important, right? I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think just letting, like, we need to be mindful that not only does your risk of refracture elevate after this injury, but so does it on the opposite side because of everything you just mentioned.
And
Like
everything is
everything
at
kind
higher
of
risk.
addresses. Yeah.
And not just bone, like everything, like your tendons and your like muscles, and everything is in a reduced capacity state, you know, just from you not running for 6 weeks at least. You know, it's everything is vulnerable when you get back to it. And so it is very important to be having a rehab approach, a holistic one, when you are just simply healing from a fracture or something. When you are immobilized, there's so much you can do, and you need to be creative and get it done. And just quick story is that there was an individual that reached out. Actually, no. So he filled out a form on my website to download one of my like runner ebooks or something. And then he indicated on his form, because I always ask the question, like, are you currently injured or are you just looking for knowledge? And so he put that he was injured. And so I gave him a call just to see what was up. And he was like, he spoke to me in a way that was like, there's nothing you can do or I can do about it right now. I have a fracture and there's nothing I can do right now. So yeah, like, and that was just, and I wasn't going to fight it or anything like at the time. I was just, cold calling somebody to check in because they said they were injured, but so it wasn't the time. But he eventually, what ended up happening, he eventually ended up working with me down the road. And so I ended up getting the whole story. So what happened after that is he did the entire rest period prescribed by his physician. His physician gave him a green light to start training again, and he did it in a probably not the most sensible way, jumping straight back into things from nothing. And he tripped off this like posterior tib tendinopathy that was just insane. And so that was the next like plague, and that lasted longer and probably gave him more difficulty than the fracture. So and then he ended up having a series it was basically like a chain of injuries after that. So this is not uncommon. It's something that we see where people take off a ton of time, they get immobilized, they don't do anything, and they get very, very weak's maybe the wrong word, but relatively weak or reduced capacity. And then they jump back into it because muscle memory and longing, and they overdo it. So this is what we're trying to kind of stress the importance of not doing it that way. So that's my story.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition to talk about rehab afterwards, and maybe even more so emphasis on that running or just weight bearing progression afterwards. Because it is, because even the ortho that I saw, he's kind of like, yeah, we'll get to this point and then you can just ease back in. It's like, well, that's not very specific, especially here in Colorado. You give somebody a green light like that and they go for day one is an hour long, or something crazy like
up the mountain.
What I was thinking, like a 10 minutes broken up.
Yeah.
Something like that. So it's something we need to be very methodical about getting into.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that could be a whole episode by itself, I think, like post immobilization return to running, which it is similar. We touched on this a little bit. Episode 5, I think it is the fundamentals of progressing your running. We gave 3 different categories. There was like the newbie, there was the seasoned runner who's just taken some time off and then getting back into it, and then there was the person returning from injury. And so, but yeah, no, totally, there's you need to do like a full on run walk program. Like it just depends where your starting point was, but yeah, you definitely can't just like green light, let's go kind of thing.
Yeah, a piece I hit on a lot with probably almost everybody I work with is that the purpose right now is building capacity. Like I know you want to regain all your fitness, but that's like down the road here. Like we need to regain capacity, then get your volume and frequency up to prior levels. Then we can
Mm-hmm.
talk about intensity, demonstrate good tolerance there. Then we can talk about getting fit for the next race. And yes, that is a long timeline, but you are going to be set up so well following that that
Mm-hmm.
it, I don't want to guarantee success, but that's as close as we're going to get.
Yeah, I mean it's like I hate using car analogies for people, but like it's like getting a you know maintaining like a Mustang engine, but now it's in like a broken down Prius, right? Like, or maybe not a broken down Prius, but like a not well maintained Prius or something like that, where maybe it's like super cool for like a day, right? Like that first run back, you're like, whoa, my God, like endorphins, this is amazing. And then the reality is that like the car starts falling apart because the car is not meant to be dealing with this, these forces and stuff like that. Right. So bad analogy, but basically we want to build ourselves up back up to the Mustang, quality before we start acting like a Mustang and using a Mustang engine. I'm bad with analogies, but anyway, you get the point. Um, you get the point.
Yeah.
Anyway, should we move on to
Yeah.
the next?
So,
Oh yeah, whatever.
well, I'm just gonna explain like kind of where I kind of plan on starting once I can wean off the boot is I'm actually starting at just some step goals. Because right now my step goal has plummeted, at least per my watch, to less than 5,000. So it's like I'm like not moving at all. So that's the component I'm just going to start with is just working on just generally being more active during the day for a week or two, and then start plugging into some more intentional kind of brisk walking stuff as tolerance and motion allows. Because I'm going to try and also do that uphill on the treadmill just to facilitate a little bit more cardiovascular component to it. And then I'm progressing to that for a little bit before I even get to a run walk. So this is gonna be like 4 weeks. That's not like
Mm-hmm.
see the position green light. Like I'll start that just kind of on the tail end.
Yep.
But just to give some perspective of kind of where I'm gonna start with this and progress from.
Yeah, absolutely. Always start with that progressive walk program, and then that can turn into a run walk program. Yeah. And then you start pulling the, you know, frequency, duration, intensity levers in a systematic way. So yep, don't try to just do it all on your own or just listen to your doctor's general cookie cutter advice. That's not that hard to reach out to a PT and make sure you don't screw yourself up worse than the fracture. So when you try to get back at it. But anyway, if you have questions about any of that, reach out. Um, what was the next little what question we were gonna answer?
The next thing I have on my list was just fueling, which I had in mind specific to bone stuff, but I
Oh
mean really
yeah, that's
apply to like when you're injured in general. Because a
so
lot
like
of
what's the
people
question like that you get relating to this? Like how is it typically phrased?
less of a question, more of a comment that
Okay.
about their weight, or that now they're just gonna eat less, or whatever it is. And truth of the matter is like your body's working hard regionally to kind of repair that. It still needs all the nutrients, all the calories, and the energy to support that. And if you put on a couple pounds, like that's not a big deal. This isn't going to be your new normal. You're going to get back to activity. Everything's going to normalize.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be okay. Especially around the holidays right now. Like you don't need to do anything crazy or drastic. Because we
Mm-hmm.
we want to set you up for success, especially in the case of a bone stress injury where there might be a low energy availability component to this, where we could spin our wheels in the rehab process and never get anywhere because it's ultimately a fueling nutrition issue and not a training, um, you know, physical capacity thing to it.
Yeah, I don't think so anybody who has a, bone stress injury under my care, I do recommend that they go speak to a dietitian. And I don't think I've ever had anybody take me up on that and get analyzed and talked to, by the dietitian and not be somewhat energy deficient according to the dietitian based on their, level of fitness, their training demands, and their nutrition. That anyway, so like it's just very common. Is probably the reason why you got injured. A huge factor of that is the nutrition component, and so, but just as important, the recovery process. It's a super important part of that recovery process. And I think actually this relates a little bit back to the cycling like a crazy person on the bike when you're trying to heal a fracture too. There are instances like in higher risk stress fractures, femoral neck, navicular, whatever, just these places that don't have super great blood flow, don't heal super well, and complications can be bad. So where we want to maximize healing as much as possible. And in those situations, that's not uncommon to sometimes maybe want that person to not be metabolically stressing themselves like a whole ton during that healing process. And so those are really hard conversations, because it's like, oh, I know that you want to like scratch that itch and go like smash the Peloton, but really right now we got to make sure this heals the right way. And so it comes down to fueling and nutrients and how we want them to be abundant, but we also want them to be focused in the body on the areas that matter.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's hard for any runner, probably any athlete injured, but personally I feel like it's the hardest for the high school and collegiate athletes,
Yeah,
who have outside pressures on them to perform for a multitude of reasons. So to get them to scale back is sometimes, and get everybody on the team, coach, athletic trainer, parents, etc., on board with that. So we can really have kind of a long-term outlook for just health and well-being.
absolutely. Yep, they're the tough ones for sure. But sometimes with the busy adults, conversely speaking, they sometimes something like this will happen and it'll just derail them for like they end up just sometimes not even coming back to running the same way ever again. I've seen that happen. It's just it's tough. So every individual has their own, and I think that's because sometimes they end up just realizing they have other responsibilities and end up just focusing on those, and then it's harder to sometimes come back to running after. But every individual has, these are just complicated kind of situations. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, an important conversation to have, I think. So, if you're the 5 minutes you spend with the physician, or if your PT is super busy and not able to talk about this stuff, like having somebody in your corner to talk through this stuff becomes very important in understanding other moving parts, such as, a lot of PTs, if they're not really focused on kind of running or endurance population, might miss the fueling component, or might miss that this is kind of affecting you bigger than just, the physical limitations. Like there's some psychosocial factors that maybe we need to get you in touch with a counselor, somebody to kind of talk through this and help develop a new perspective around this.
Yep. Yeah. You definitely recommend, if you have running issues and there's a running specialist, go see somebody who specializes in runners. But even then, still, it's not, you just never know. So make sure you're always asking why and challenge that, your PT in a friendly way. But I actually just saw an Instagram post or something like that the other day. There was some elite runner who she was injured for a long time, and it was like around the shin too. Like I was just very confused at the story, because they were talking about it as if she had like failed PT, because she had done like weeks and weeks and weeks of PT. And then she finally went to a doctor and got an MRI and there was a stress fracture. And I'm just like, oh my God, like that freaking what PT was she seeing? Like, you know, and we all like we all have that situation where we miss a bone stress injury just once and never do it again or whatever. But I'd hope it'd be a more subtle situation than that one. And so you just got to be careful with who you're working with in general when it comes to these types of things that have higher consequences if they're missed and or done incorrectly.
For sure.
So one question I got recently that we haven't talked about on a podcast yet, which is surprising. We may have talked about it, but maybe we definitely haven't maybe elaborated on it, is so why I get this mainly on the people who are inquiring to work with me on a coaching in a coaching relationship. And so one of the things I definitely tell them about on the kind of discovery call or whatever you want to call it is the fact that I'm not going to be prescribing their training in miles and paces or even heart rate, really. It's going to be based mainly around time and effort using mainly an RPE or rating of perceived exertion scale, modified 1 to 10, not the original Borg, which is what 8 to what is it?
6 to 20, I think.
6 to 20. Yeah, 6 to 20. It's been a while. That one's a little bit confusing to use for the just layperson, but that one is used primarily a lot in a more research setting, laboratory setting. But so the modified RPE scale, 1 to 10, how hard is this? Where a 10 is I'm going to pretty much immediately collapse sometime very soon type scale. So the question I get relating to that is typically why and what's the benefit of doing it that way, because that seems very different and people don't like change, and especially when it comes to something like running. Everybody loves their miles, finishing their run, running a lap around the parking lot just so they can get an even 8 miles rather than running. I would argue, well, I'm just going to run the extra lap so I can get an even hour on my watch. I don't care what the miles are. So yeah, I mean, Adam, what are your just first thoughts that come to your mind if somebody's asking, why can't you just prescribe me some runs in miles and paces? Why do we have to use or why would you use, what are the benefits around RPE or effort and time instead?
I think it comes down to trying to make sure you're getting the adequate stimulus for the adequate duration. Right. If you're looking to run, we'll say your typical easy run is 5 miles and you run it at 10-minute pace, because that's what an elite runner or someone other is doing, and they run it at a 7-minute pace. So now they're running that same run at 35 minutes or in 35 minutes, and you're running 50 minutes. So you're stressed at that same effort level for 50 minutes, and they're stressed at that for 35 minutes. That is now very different runs, even though you ran the same distance. So it doesn't really scale. And all of the mileage stuff really comes from modeling what elite level athletes are doing, or those that are really more competitive. And so I think a classic example, to make it more applicable to people, is when you train for the marathon and there's the big 20 miler. Well, when you look at elite athletes, they're doing that 2.5, 3 hours, no big deal. And a relatively frequent basis, being in that, 18 to 20 mile ballpark as they build up, maybe even more up to that marathon. But for your average individual, say you're still running it at 10-minute pace, you're going to be going well beyond 2.5, 3 hours. And now there's going to be a big recovery burden. Unless that is a normal for you, it's probably not worth it extrapolating that.
Plus, we tend to see a point of diminishing returns with fitness gains with long run efforts longer than a couple of hours. So not only are you increasing recovery burden, but the on those long runs more than your faster counterparts, but your or peers or whatever you want to call them. but you're also receiving less, I don't know, fitness per minute stimulus, whatever like imaginary term you want to come up with, in terms of like how much you're getting in return on your fitness from the back end of that run. So yeah, I think time and effort gives us a really good idea of like, hey, how long and how hard did we go? Whereas, I mean, I think about this very passionately because I do think that like if you're training for shorter and road-based kind of races and stuff like that, you could probably get away with a lot of the pace and distance kind of training if it's individualized to your needs. But when it comes to trail and ultra running, there's no place, absolutely no place for miles and distance. Sorry, distance and paces or whatever you want to call it. So, and one just quick example of why is like this big race, local trail race in town. There's a 25 and 50 miler, Quad Rock. And so let's just say somebody's training for the 25. So the Quad Rock 25 is 25 miles, 5,500 feet of climbing. In the training plan that floats around for people for this race, not my training plan, but I see it used a lot. It basically, you know, it'll ask like, hey, run 20 miles with, and people assume that's on the Quad Rock course. And if you're local, you're going to run on the course. It's such a local race. So, okay, I'm going to go do 20 miles on the Quad Rock course. That's going to equate to like 4,000 feet of climbing on technical trails. And so we have one individual who, like, I know people off the top of my head who can do that 20-mile run with 4,000 feet of climbing on the Quad Rock course in 3 hours. Okay. And then we have the average person who is probably like middle of the bell curve, who they go out and they're like, oh, this is what it says to do on the training plan. And it takes that person like 5 hours. And those are just like huge differences. And 5 hours to go out on like a 5-hour long run is excessive. There's like not many circumstances where that's appropriate, unless if we're training for ultra marathons, there are places where we can strategically work in longer long runs like that. But like that is detrimental potentially. And the risk of injury goes up. I mean, who the frick has time for that? You know, in terms of like normal people. Anyway, people do it, they get injured, it happens. But like trail and ultra, there's just no place for distances and paces, especially paces, like holy moly. Unless it, once again, it's like flat and gravel, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that I'm glad you brought that up, because as soon as you started talking, that was another like scalable perspective that doesn't quite add up, where effort and minutes do scale. You know, an hour on the road at a given RPE is the same as an hour on the trail at a given RPE. Certainly there's going to be different biomechanical neuromuscular components, but from a cardiovascular stimulus adaptation, it's going to be the same.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, 1 week you might be fine with that, but the reality is these, you know, so they're like, oh, 16 miles this week, 18 the next, and 20 the week after that, and then back down to 16 maybe. But to the average on the Quad Rock course, you know, that's basically a whole your month of long runs is like, and they're like on this plan, there's even like back-to-back long runs, even just depending on the plan. It's just insane. But your month of long runs is like basically like, oh, 3.5 hours this day, 4 hours the next week, 5 hours the week after that, 3.5 hours the week. That's like an excessive, unnecessary amount. And I would argue that I can get somebody feeling fresher and potentially faster with, you know, reducing the duration of those long runs and doing something better with the amount of time that they have feeling good. Because here's the thing is like, I used to do longer long runs like that all the time. And a number of years ago, and I remember I wouldn't want to run again for like 3 days. Like I would have to almost take 2 full days off of running after those long runs. And that's detrimental. I never worked in speed work because I felt like if I did, I was going to get instantly injured because my body was always teetering on the edge of injury because of these crazy, stupid long runs. So anyway, I know we just keep talking about long runs, but there's a difference too. Like if somebody has 5, you know, up to the summit of Horsetooth and down is 5 miles flat, about 50, almost 1,500 feet of climbing. And, I can do that in under an hour. And there's my 5 miles and an hour run, like endurance effort or something, RPE 5 to 6. But like a middle of the bell curve person, that's like an hour and a half endurance run. And so those are very different stimuli. So even just the shorter runs to trail and ultra. Yeah. Anyway, but I don't want to talk too much, but I do want to bring it back from trail and ultra. Just the fact that like RPE is something that is going to be relative on a daily basis, relative to your stress in your life, relative to how much sleep you got and if you fueled properly or not that day before your run, like all of these things. And so if all of those things are in the red, your body, and not to go like full central governor theory or anything like that, which has its flaws, but like more or less your body's going to be like, wow, we're not really in a state to push things right now. So things are going to just feel a little bit harder. That's because I'm holding you back a little bit, because you're just not, like, we need to just hold back a little bit today. Right. And then conversely, on days where you're like, everything is feeling really good and you've been taking care of yourself, your body may, let you go a little bit harder. And those days you feel like you're floating, right? And you can run faster, right? I'm allowing you to run faster than you normally do, because a 5 out of 10 today feels like a 8-minute pace instead of an 8:30 pace. So go ahead and run that 8-minute pace, because that's what a 5 out of 10 is for you today. But tomorrow, when a 5 out of 10 is like a 9-minute pace, I want you to be honest with that and run a 9-minute pace,
Yeah, you just hit it right there. The self-honesty piece, that's everything. To play devil's advocate a little bit, though, to kind of broaden the scope of understanding this, most of the time using time and intensity as kind of my anchor for prescription. But when we talk about, things that are probably 10K and shorter, going like down to the mile, now we're looking at, at least the RP scale that I use with my athletes, between 8 to 10. Like there's a lot of paces in between that. And so when we look to get, 8 to 12 weeks outside of a goal race, and we're doing a lot of specific training for that, I might do a lot more pace work there for the intense pieces, just so we can really hone in on that. Where effort, there might be a 30-second swing there, and like that's not gonna work out at that specific event too well.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. And I snuck in there early on. I was like, maybe with shorter distance, shorter, flatter, I think I said road-based kind of stuff, but definitely can utilize paces. I just think that revolving the entirety of your running identity and training around distance. Like I honestly, I bumped into some friends at the trailhead on Sunday. I was about to get out and do my long run, so I did it with them. And, what do you know? We had to circle the parking lot at the end to get well, I guess this is a little bit different, because he wanted to hit an even 100 miles for the week. So, I guess that's fun, saying you hit 100 mile. I guess there's, Adrian McDonald, he won the Leadville 100 the last 2 years. One of these guys, we were talking about it. They know him, and apparently his thing last year was doing 99-mile weeks on like a really consistent basis. And everybody was like, what the hell are you doing? Why aren't you hitting 100? Like, so I was actually really proud of him for that. For whatever reason he was doing that. That's awesome.
That's funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah, no, it was like Nick Clark who said it. Nick was like, because they're buddies. Nick's like, what are you doing? You scared of 100 miles? I can't do his accent, but he's like, you scared of 100 miles or something? Anyway, so yep. But last thing being heart rate. Yeah, heart rate has its place too, but it's just a special. Okay, look, if you're using even these newer, like I just got a new watch. It does a pretty crap job at consistently measuring my heart rate. So even if you think it's really, really good, studies just show it's just not great. I think maybe some newer studies need to come out now that technology's gotten better, but it's just not worth basing your training around. So all of your conversation slash endurance effort miles, using your heart rate to dictate how fast you're running is probably useless. So I wouldn't do that. If you have a chest strap heart rate monitor and you're using that 100% of the time, you could use heart rate a little bit, but you got to understand the limitations of heart rate, like your hydration state and your stress state. And if you had coffee right before the run, like stuff like this affects those numbers. And you need to realize that, like, the more, swayed it is, or skewed, I guess is the word, the less effective your training is going to be using that. So I like using heart rate chest strap for like my VO2 max intervals, like lactate threshold, tempo intervals sometimes. But other than that, I'm really just using it more as like a curiosity, versus dictating how fast I'm running on that day because of it. So that's heart rate for you. I don't know if Adam, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely chest strap is king. But I also learned recently, I had a new coaching client who has an armband. So I looked into that, and I can't remember what the company was now. Anyway, they have, so most wrist-based monitors have a single light color. And so there can be discrepancy with accuracy with different skin tones. So this armband company uses different color light to help kind of measure that, number one. Number two, it's, unless your watch is really sound, like tight, there's going to be aberrant movement of the watch that could alter that sense. It can also get linked with your cadence. So having an armband, I don't know, it seems like a better second-rate option to a chest strap if you don't want to wear that for any reason. At least more promising from what I understand than just the wrist-based monitor from the watch. Still gold standard chest strap, obviously, but you also need to know your max, or a very
Max,
close
yeah.
true max,
And not a 220 minus your age.
formula estimated, or some people use like they'll measure like your threshold heart rate, and so that you can prescribe stuff in a meaningful way and know what you're doing. Similar to you, I like it for certain intensity pieces that are kind of sustained to make sure we're in kind of the right level. But for someone with my background, who, looking back now, probably high school, college, I had a moderate day, a hard day, and a very hard day. Like we never ran truly easy, because we just could, and performance was like everything. So like always pushed. And so my definition of easy, like, can I have a conversation? Yes. But am I having intermittent like breaks and sentences to take a breath and stuff? Yes.
Oh man.
So like it helps me make sure I am scaled down appropriately and not running quote unquote easy, because it is relatively easy to everything else I do, but not to facilitate a true maximized recovery for that day.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny, man. On Strava, like there are people I know who I know I'm significantly faster than. Like race day, 5K, marathon, it doesn't matter the distance. Like I will smash them. But they run every single conversational run. So like 80 to 90% of their runs, they run like a full minute per mile faster than I do. And I just think of that and I'm like, okay. Interesting. I wonder how much cumulative extra, like, think about it. If it's just like a couple percent of cumulative extra stress per run or per mile or something like that, that they're accumulating unnecessarily. Think about how much more you could accomplish with like a strategic effort if you were to just take that and put it towards like a structured speed work or some other sort of workout or extra volume or something like that, and what kind of progress you can get that way. So, I always thought that funny. And the worst part of it is these people will post like the title of their run is something like, oh, like, just 5 miles easy or something like, oh, just a shakeout, like, something like that. And I'm like, what? Like 750 pace is a shakeout for a person who runs like a 5K in like 21 minutes? Like, really? So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, that's just kind of I digress a bit, but anyway, um,
Yeah.
cool.
You just gotta be we have a friend, he's kind of funny that we run with, and he is super into just volume and really, really easy stuff.
Mhm.
And if we pick it up at all, he'd be like, I didn't know we were sprinting today. Or we'll start going up a hill and he's like, God, I didn't know we were doing a tempo. What is this? Like, slow down.
Yeah. Yep.
And he just like will harass us. It's pretty funny.
Well, and yeah, those guys that I met, I bumped into at the trailhead, they're all really fast. And so I was like pretty fast. Like one of the guys I was actually talking to, he runs like a, I don't know, 16-minute 5K, something like that. But I was like, so yeah, I don't want to join you guys because you guys are gonna kick my ass. And he's like, oh, today we're just taking it easy. We're gonna be chill. And then we did like 38 minutes up Towers Road, which is it's 1,750 feet with in 6.4 miles or something. Anyway, so and anything under 40 is like pretty fast. I think the fastest I've ever done, which it's been like 6 years since I've even tried, and I didn't even try that day. I was just getting a little competitive with a friend. I've never actually gone all out on Towers Road, but it was like, I've only ever done like 36 minutes. I could probably do low 30s, but like we did like a significant effort up Towers Road. And I was just like, easy, huh? Chill, huh? So it's just funny people's perception of what's actually easy versus physiologically maybe what we might define as easy. And even more interestingly is maybe what's the minimum kind of like uh optimal or minimal kind of amount of effort or stress that we need to get some training adaptations. I think if people realize how much easier they could run while still gaining like fitness in certain circumstances and volumes, then they may be surprised, right? And maybe they'd be more likely to run easier. But then they'd have to cancel their Strava account and delete it.
Yeah. Can't be doing that. Because then it didn't happen.
Exactly. I know. Cool. Well, we have some other questions, but I think we'll save those for another time.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, it's just I know I wanted to talk about recovering from a race. Like when is it time to like when is it okay and appropriate to like jump back into running after a big race? That was one of the questions. And then what else was there?
I think that's the only one we didn't
Oh
get to.
yeah, that was the only one.
But
Okay, and we'll save that
that's
because
okay. Yeah.
I want to go I want to go
Yeah,
ham on that one a little bit. It's also another pet peeve of mine. But we'll get to that another time. So if that sounds good to you, or if you have any other topics you'd like us to cover, just send us a message or let us know. Adam, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we close out?
No, that's it. I was gonna suggest we save that one as well.
Yeah, cool. This was a good chat, and happy we were able to get it out. Everybody have a good rest of
Yeah.
your day and go
Go make some
make some
strides.
strides. Okay. Okay, later, guys. Bye.